Your breath freezes into sound. The Yakut people have a name for it: the whisper of the stars. Siberia, larger than the United States and Europe combined, yet so silent you can drive for hundreds of kilometers without seeing a single soul. The cold here is not a season. It is a presence, -71.2 cc, colder than the surface of Mars, and 300,000 people call this home. You've seen boiling water freeze in an instant. You've heard the number -71, but you still don't understand why they haven't left. This film is not about the cold, it's about the people, and the thing no temperature can freeze. Why do 300,000 people choose to stay when they could leave? The road built from human bones around the 20-minute mark, the house that floats above the ice around 25, and the thing the cold cannot freeze around 35. "40 minutes, long enough to make a journey." Part 1. Yakutia is not a geographic accident. It is a choice. Who came, why they stayed, and where this cold truly comes from. Part 2. How the cold shapes the bodies, the architecture, the food, and the moral code of the Yakut people, including the road that was built from bones. Part 3. What truly keeps them here is not money, not a lack of options, and what that tells a world that is slowly losing its own identity. Begin. We'll start with a fact. In winter, the sun appears for no more than 3 hours a day. On the coldest days, the light doesn't truly reach the ground. It merely suggests itself on the horizon, then disappears. Yakutia, 3 times the size of India, a population of just over 1 million people. This is not the emptiness of a forgotten place. This is a chosen emptiness. The indigenous Yakut people, the Saka, have lived on this land for thousands of years, not because they were forced, not because they didn't know anywhere else. They migrated north from the steppes near Lake Baikal, and they chose to stay. In the Saka language, the word for home is not a building, it is a state, the feeling of belonging to a place where you can be most fully yourself. But here is what the world doesn't understand about Yakutia. This place is extraordinarily wealthy. Yakutia supplies nearly 30% of the world's diamonds. Gold, oil, natural gas. This is Russia's treasure chest. Yet in villages not far from those mines, people still chop blocks of ice from the river to have water at home, because pipes cannot be buried in permanently frozen ground. Rich for the world, merciless to its own people. And the cold doesn't only come from latitude, it comes from geography. Yakutia sits in a vast basin surrounded by mountains. Arctic air pours in and cannot escape. It settles, it compresses, it becomes -71. The cold didn't come to kill, it came to shape. But if this was a choice, what did the Yakut people choose with? And does that thing still exist? When the Soviet Union arrived in the 20th century, they brought engineers, factories, and ideology. They built roads, opened mines, and turned Yakutia into an industrial center. But the land they thought they could conquer taught them a long lesson. The cold does not negotiate. People had to change. Permafrost, that is the technical word. But to the Yakut, it is simply earth, their earth, frozen since before any empire ever set foot here. There is something about a land where you cannot drill freely, cannot bury pipes, cannot build in the ordinary way, and yet people have called it home for 1,000 years. It forces you to ask, what do they know that we don't? To understand why they stay, you need to look at what the cold has done to their bodies and to their souls. Winter in Yakutsk is not an exception. It is the default. The cars never turn off. Not because the drivers are lazy, but because if an engine stops, the oil freezes within minutes. The car becomes a useless block of metal. In the West, people pay $200 for 3 minutes of therapeutic cold in a cryotherapy chamber. In Yakutia, free, all day. Not a single building in Yakutsk touches the ground. Every structure is built on concrete piles, driven deep into the permafrost, raised 2 meters above the earth. If a building rested directly on the ground, the heat from inside would gradually thaw the frozen earth beneath it, and the structure would sink, twist, and eventually collapse. This is not construction technique. This is philosophy. Don't try to conquer the cold. Learn to stand above it. Water pipes cannot go underground. They run above, wrapped in thick insulation, suspended along the sides of buildings like the exposed veins of the city. Doors don't have one layer, they have 3, each one a barrier against the outside air. Entering a building in Yakut is like passing through 3 different worlds, -50, then -20, then warm. But architecture is only the outer layer. The cold went deeper, into the kitchen, onto the table, into the daily rituals of the Yakut people. There are no refrigerators at the outdoor markets. The city is the refrigerator. Milk is sold in white square blocks. Meat is stacked like firewood. Butter is cut with an axe. This is not an image of poverty. It is the image of a culture that has lived with cold long enough to turn it into convenience. And then there is stroganina. Riverfish are caught beneath the ice. Sturgeon, whitefish. The moment they break the surface, they freeze completely solid, and they are eaten just like that, shaved into paper-thin slices, dipped in salt and pepper, uncooked, unmarinated, whole. People in the West eat sushi, raw fish cured in vinegar, born from Japanese culture. Stroganina is not sushi, it is not fusion, it is the morning ritual of a people who have lived at -50 degrees for thousands of years. The cold turned food into culture. The Yakut body needs approximately 6,000 calories a day to maintain its core temperature through winter, nearly double that of someone in a temperate climate. The diet leans heavily toward animal fat, not for lack of options, but because that is the most efficient fuel for a body fighting the cold. But more important than architecture and food is what the Yakut call the unwritten law on the Kolyma highway, the long road connecting Yakutia to the rest of Russia. There is a rule. It is not written down. There is no legal penalty for breaking it. But everyone knows, if you see a car stopped by the roadside in winter, you must stop. Not because you are kind, but because at -50 degrees, help is the only thing standing between a person and death. The cold doesn't only shape architecture, it shapes ethics. In an environment that offers no forgiveness, selfishness is a death sentence, and solidarity becomes survival instinct. R504. The Kolyma Highway, the Road of Bones.
But there is one road the Yakut drive every day that few people dare look at honestly. R504. The Kolyma Highway, built under Stalin from the 1930s to the 1950s. The men who built it were not paid workers, they were gulag prisoners, sent here for crimes ranging from treason to writing a poem deemed ideologically unsound. Temperatures dropped below -60 at night, not enough food, not enough clothing, and when someone died, the ground was too frozen to dig a grave. Some were buried in the road itself. That is not a poetic name. The Road of Bones, the name people gave it, is a physical truth. And every morning the Yakut people drive that road to work. They know its history, and they drive it anyway. That is not acceptance, that is the road of memory, to live on the foundation of those who are gone, and to let that mean something. But memory does not only live in asphalt, it lives in language. The Sakha language, the tongue of the indigenous Yakut people, is still taught in schools, still spoken at home, still alive after centuries of pressure to assimilate. Language survives at -71, empires do not. And then among all this evidence of adaptation, there is a moment that technical language cannot describe.
At -60 degrees, your breath freezes the instant it leaves your body and makes the softest sound imaginable, like a handful of rice scattered across a wooden floor. The Yakut people have a word for this, the whisper of the stars.
No other language on earth has a word for it.
Because nowhere else is cold enough, often enough, for it to need a name. But adapting to Yakutia is not only about the body or the buildings. There is something the cold does to the mind, and no one talks about it enough. The polar night. In some parts of Yakutia, the sun simply does not rise for weeks on end. The sky lightens to a pale grey for a few hours, and darkens again. That is all. In most parts of the world, that would be a psychological emergency. Here, it is simply December. People learn to read the quality of darkness, the blue-black of deep night, the gray of an approaching dawn that never quite arrives, the difference between a sky that holds stars and a sky that is simply empty. To live in Yakutia is to understand that the world is not always lit, and that some of the most important things happen in the dark. But the body can adapt, the architecture can be redesigned. The question that architecture and food and even language still cannot answer is the largest one. What truly keeps them here?
Now we come to the part no Siberia video has ever reached. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. For the first time in decades, the people of Yakutia could leave. The borders opened. The choice became real. And many left. Of course they did. Who wouldn't choose a warmer city, more opportunity, a different kind of life? But here is what happened after. Many came back, not because there were no other options, not because they had failed, but because something they found in the warmer places felt incomplete. They could get a job in Moscow, they could get warm in Vladivostok, but they could not be themselves, fully, in the way that only Yakutia allows. Identity is not what you hold on to when things are easy. It is what gets forged in the conditions that offer no compromise. The cold does not forgive pretense. You cannot perform survival. You either live it or you don't. In a world of centrally heated apartments, grocery delivery, and climate-controlled offices, it is very easy to become someone slightly different from who you actually are. The edges soften, the specific things about you blur into something more general. In Yakutia, nothing softens. The cold strips every unnecessary layer away, from your clothing, from your behavior, from your sense of self. What remains is who you actually are. The modern world is flattening difference. Globalization has made everywhere slightly more like everywhere else. The same coffee chains, the same architecture, the same aspirations broadcast from the same screens to the same people. Yakutia is the living counter-evidence. The very thing that made this place so hostile to the outside world is the exact thing that preserved it. A culture doesn't survive by being comfortable. It survives by being necessary. The cold does not forgive pretense, and that is why the Yakut people are among the most genuine people on earth. There is a question worth sitting with, not about Yakutia, about yourself. Are you living somewhere that lets you be fully who you are? And the question we opened with, why 300,000 people choose to stay when they could leave, now has its answer. Oymyakon at -71 is not a hell of ice, it is a forge. People adapted not only with their bodies, but with culture, solidarity, and meaning. From the architecture of their buildings to the road laid over the bones of the dead. The thing the cold cannot freeze is identity, and that is the only thing truly worth keeping. 300,000 people have not left, because this is not simply where they live. This is where they are themselves. And the whisper of the stars, the sound of breath freezing at -60, is not the sound of suffering. It is the sound of a people who chose the most difficult version of being home, and found in that difficulty something the rest of the world is still looking for. If this film made you stop and think, there are more journeys like this one waiting here. Subscribe, turn on